Now, let's talk about the Muslim world. 1.3 billion people, the preponderance of whom live in the 57 countries that are members of the Organization of the Islamic Conference. The gross national product of those 57 countries altogether is less than that of Germany. So we're talking about 1/5 of the world's population, the Muslim world, but 1/2 of the world's poor. These are countries, these are economies that offer their young people very little to look forward to. Now, I'm not saying that poverty by itself is a cause of radicalization. I think it's one contributor, and there are several others that I'm going to outline for you that are less easily quantified. One is the lack of civil society. Now, what is civil society? Well, this is civil society, citizens coming together, talking, sharing thoughts. That, I think, wonderful, magnificent election we're underway in the United States right now is a great example of a civil society examining its problems and trying to resolve them in a peaceful manner. Well, let me tell you about the situation in Saudi Arabia. I'm not trying to lump all Arab and Muslim countries together. They're very different. But just to speak of the Saudi situation for a moment, what was life like for my young reporters at the Saudi Gazette? There were no parks, very few museums. There was no theater, no plays, no movies, no nightclubs, no public music. The internet was monitored and controlled. There was no dating. Women couldn't drive. That entire space of life that we call civil society simply didn't exist. There was nothing between the government and the mosque except shopping. Recently in Jeddah, a new IKEA furniture store opened, and it was such a thrilling event that 15,000 people showed up. 2 were trampled to death. Now, it's not surprising that in such an impoverished civil society that depression is a real problem. All of my reporters were depressed. Some of them bit their fingernails down to the nubs and their legs jiggle and couldn't sleep at night. I remember one of my reporters did a story about a study of depression done at King Abdulaziz University, which is bin Laden's alma mater. Of the 2,000 students surveyed, 67% of the boys and 72% of the girls showed symptoms of depression. 7% of the girls in this strict Muslim country admitted that they had attempted suicide. Another factor, also very difficult to quantify, but I think key to understanding this radicalization, especially in Saudi Arabia, is the gender apartheid. It's less pronounced elsewhere, although the delay in marriage is a problem all across the Muslim world. But just to speak of the situation in Saudi Arabia, this meeting would never take place. The women wouldn't be here. And it takes a toll. I'll tell you the story of Najla, one of my female reporters at the Saudi Gazette. The female reporters were in a separate office under the stairwell, and nobody ever saw them. And I insisted I couldn't teach them if I couldn't see them. So I managed once a week to get the women to come up to the newsroom, and we'd have a meeting. And nobody, it was unprecedented. This little black train of women coming up into the newsroom. And one of them, Najla, had an appointment in Riyadh early in the morning, before the first flight from Jeddah arrived. And so as a single Saudi woman, in order to travel, she had to have the written permission of the man in charge of her, whoever that would be, her father, her husband, her brother, even her son, whoever is the man of the house. And so she got her father to sign a written permission for her to travel by herself. As a single Saudi woman, she can't drive, so she had to fly. She flew into Riyadh. She can't stay in a hotel by herself. So she gets off the airplane and she goes and sits down. Now, as it happens, the Riyadh airport closes at 11 at night, and the guard came through and said, "What are you doing? You can't stay here." And she said, "What are you going to do with me?" I remember that attitude. And what could he do with her? She couldn't stay in a hotel. Could he throw her out on the street? He finally decided to let her sleep on the carpet of the mosque in the airport. And then he turned out all the lights and locked the door, and Najla spent the night in the airport by herself. And the next morning they turn on the lights and she's able to go to her appointment. Now that's what it's like for a woman. But it takes a toll on the men too. I remember I went to the shopping mall with one of my reporters, and he sees two Saudi women descending the escalator. They're entirely encased in black, the black abaya, the black hijab, and even, not just the niqab, they had their eyes covered as well. They were like in a bird cage. And he turns to me and he says, "Check them out." Just give you that story as one measure of the desperation Saudi guys feel. They're unsocialized. They haven't spent their teenage years learning how to please girls, which is a lot of what civilization really is. Now, another factor, very difficult to quantify, but I think key to understanding the radical mind inside the Islamist world, is humiliation. If you read bin Laden, you'll see it's one of the most common words in his vocabulary. And many Muslim men have been humiliated, physically humiliated, like Zawahiri, thrown into a prison after the Sadat assassination, tortured, put in a cage with wild dogs, just unbelievable savagery. But that never happened to bin Laden. Rich kid, son of one of the most prominent families in Saudi Arabia. What does the word humiliation mean to him? And why does it resonate so strongly with Muslims all over the world who may never have experienced any of that kind of physical or psychological humiliation? I think what bin Laden is speaking to is a sense of cultural loss that every Muslim feels. I mean, every Muslim knows there was once only one great superpower, and it was Islam. It reached from Spain to Indonesia. It was unparalleled in its power in the world. And ironically enough, you can date the moment when Islam began its long retreat to September 11th, 1683, which is the date that the King of Poland arrived to break the Ottoman siege of Vienna, turning back the furthest advance of Muslim armies in Europe. It's not just bin Laden who dreams of restoring Islam to its rightful place. Now, this sense of humiliation is reinforced by these feelings of humiliation that is seen every day on the televisions in the Arab and Muslim world. Scenes from Palestine, from Lebanon, from Iraq. I was in Saudi Arabia during the war, and I watched the war on Fox and Al Jazeera, two rather similar news organizations.